Cheers, guys. Epix 911, welcome to the Monday, September 4th, 2017 edition of VR News. Lots of VR news to talk about today. Let's start things off with a game coming to virtual reality from a company that does not need a huge introduction. That company, Capcom. The game? Let's just say one of the games in this franchise, or I should say 2 to 3 of the games in this franchise, responsible for hundreds of hours of grinding between me and Exity, playing the game cooperatively on many a Gaming Friday. The game, Monster Hunter. Platform, PlayStation Portable. Capcom announcing that they are working on an out-of-home, so that's going to be VR arcade experience called Monster Hunter X Circle of Saviors. If that last part, the Circle of Saviors, sounds a bit familiar, they are collaborating with a Japanese developer called 5-4. They focus on multiplayer VR, and indeed a title that they've already created is called Circle of Saviors. And what it does and why I think this union is such a natural fit is, like Monster Hunter, it distills the experience down to the boss fight level. Indeed, Monster Hunter is all about the grind, get better loot, craft, grind again, rinse, repeat, that whole cycle. Circle of Saviors doing that, but at the action level, mimicking the fight in terms of having tanks and healers. For them, it was all about having a melee tank and a range assist. No word yet on when the game is going to come out, just that sadly it will be for the arcades only. Next up, confirmation from Jason Rubin. He had an interview with MCV.com where he stated that Rift sales were strong following the Summer of Rift sale. Then he went on to say that every dollar isn't an equal dollar. This $200 drop is a bigger deal than the last $200 drop. It's not a linear progression down to zero. You end up at a place where people say, oh, this is something I can totally afford, as opposed to, I'm still thinking about this because it's a large purchase. Rubin also revealed that VR usage itself rose over the summer, bucking the traditional video game trend fueled by a lack of big releases. He said, we found a lot of people are buying multiple pieces of software, and that's yet another reason to throw the hardware out there at a very reasonable price to bring in even more people. He then ended the interview by saying that the touch controller sales were starting to catch up with the Rift's own numbers. And this is something we talked about at the time of launch for the touch. One of the things I said was the danger is not maintaining a one-to-one attach rate. That what would make more sense is ultimately bundling the controllers in with the Rift. Now, thankfully they did that. They did it a little later than I'd hoped they'd do it. But they did it with enough time that when they get to the millions of units sold, the difference between the haves and have-nots is not going to be as huge as it would be had they not bundled the two together. And our next story, former PlayStation executive Shahid Kamal Ahmad. He used to be Sony's director of strategic content. He had a series of tweets announcing a VR game that his indie-founded company is working on. So he did this in a series of tweets. He was Sony's director of strategic content. That was one of the last roles that he had at Sony. He was responsible partly for bringing a lot of games to PlayStation 4, to PS Vita, even towards the end for some PlayStation VR titles. He then left in 2015 to form his own indie studio called Ultimatum Games. So those tweets, you can see them here, announcing a game called Chimera Zero. No information about the game, no screenshots, just a cryptic screenshot with the title of the game and a font to look at. So beyond that, no idea. We're going to have to wait to find out. I do like, a little bit of the mystery behind the, what the hell is he working on? But honestly, I don't think he's the kind of profile where many people, and I'm sorry, but that's the case, are gonna care. It would have probably been a bit smarter to at least reveal a little bit of the game in question, just to whet people's appetite. And our next story, I've said this multiple times. For me, Resident Evil 7 Biohazard, not just my favorite virtual reality horror experience, but probably my favorite horror game, period. And I know it's cliche and other people have said this as well, but it is so true. When I think back to my time playing the game, it doesn't feel like it was a game I played. It feels like it was a memory, like it actually happened. It was something that I experienced. And I love that about virtual reality. And indeed, I love that about Resident Evil 7 because it added to the spookiness factor. Well, back in 1998, Capcom released Resident Evil 2. And that was back for the original PlayStation. There's a fan of that game who's now a 3D CGI artist, and he goes by the handle/alias CryingHorn. He took on a personal ambitious project to remake Resident Evil 2 himself. And he wasn't content with just recreating the title in high definition. He wanted to go down that same path that Resident Evil 7 went and bring 2 into virtual reality. To do that, he utilized the best in current technology in terms of GPUs, CPUs, Unreal Engine 4 for the development side of things, and has basically recreated parts of that original game in pretty damn good detail. For example, Raccoon City Police Department, the whole main hall area, that is there. And of course, that very iconic monster that makes its appearance does so in this experience as well. CryingHorn has not confirmed if there are plans to convert the entire thing into VR or if it's just a personal project that, as time permits, he's going to work on. Hopefully we find out soon and get an idea of what direction he's going to take the project into. And next up, VR Playhouse, an LA-based creative studio. They're also a full-service production company working in the field of VR, creating projects like Archangel, the giant robot-themed shooter. They announced a merger last week with IdentityFX. They are a company that have contributed to movies like Prometheus, The Amazing Spider-Man. In a statement that announced the deal, the studio stated that the merger is an opportunity to refocus the company's business on original technical IP and high-end interactive services. VR Playhouse CCO and co-founder Ian Forrester is going to become the CEO of the joint company, and Leo Vizzali, who was the old CEO of that company for IdentityFX, is going to assume the role of executive producer. And next up, we have all probably seen speedruns. And speedruns to me are kind of like the successor, or I guess cousin, of the old high score contests. Like the cheesy ones they used to have on the arcade machines that got so popular, shows like That's Incredible from the 1980s, which is pretty damn cheesy looking back at it now, covered and indeed had their own version of an arcade high-scoring contest. Well, speedruns are all about finishing the game as quickly as you can. And there's generally two types. One impresses me and one doesn't impress me as much. The one that impresses me is the one that really does rely on speed and skill. I like that. This falls into that category. The other type is more about using exploits in the game. Now, admittedly, these are in the game themselves, falling through the world, using physics or geographical bugs or loopholes to finish the game quickly. An example of that would be some of the Dark Soul speedruns that you've seen. Not too impressed with that. They're kind of cool, but not ultimately that impressive. However, this SuperHot VR run, like I said, it's more like the first. Skill and speed. You got to check this out. The full thing was done in 8 minutes, 21 seconds, 217 milliseconds. That shaved 12 seconds off the former record. Just an amazing, amazing feat. And our last story. This is a prequel to the Until Dawn game, which was, of course, the on-the-rails horror game for PlayStation VR. Well, in this game, which is an actual exploration horror game, you're going to explore that same facility, except how it was at the height of its infamy 60 years ago. We got some more details on what that game is going to offer and how it's going to run. Apparently, it's going to offer branching narratives, so you're going to have choices based on dialogue that ultimately will lead to different endings. Very freaking cool. Definitely one I'm going to pick up. You know that I like my horror games, especially in VR, so I'll have to check that out. Guys, that is it for the news on this Monday. If you had a holiday, awesome. If you didn't, not quite as awesome. But hey, one more day down towards the weekend. As always, guys, cheers.